Few pirates have become as iconic as the famous female, Anne Bonny. We often find her depicted as an Irish redhead with a hot temper and a fierce sword arm, and always in the company of her dashing lover, Calico Jack. There are many stories surrounding the notorious femme fatale, some of them conflicting. She was cross-dressing, but heavily pregnant. She had a lesbian relationship with Mary Read. Her father was a wealthy lawyer. So, which one of them is true? None. We don't know the color of her hair, nor her ethnic origins, nor the extent of her relationship with John Rackham, never called Calico Jack. She was never disguised as a man, was never documented as partaking in an actual fight, aside from waving around a machete to terrify a poor woman, and we know next to nothing about her. She appears first in a government proclamation from late August, 1720. She partook in several piratical captures, before finally being caught 2 months later. In November she was found guilty and sentenced to hang, but was granted mercy since she was pregnant. After this, she disappears from history. We don't know where she came from, or where she went. All of the famous background details, the legends, the stories, have no basis in reality. They're speculation. At her best, educated guesswork. At her worst, pure fiction. We're often fascinated by romantic legends and like to think that there might be some truth to them. And some refuse to admit that these legends can often be traced to a very obvious origin. In most of these cases, these origins are hacked writers looking to make a quick buck. Most prominent is the 1724 book, A General History of the Pirates. It has very much shaped our perception of Golden Age piracy. The anonymous author, or authors, composed it using eyewitness interviews, newspaper articles, and most prominently, trial documents, and then sprinkled it with a lot of embellishments. Quite a few of them are literary conventions of the period. Since women had a very strict place in 18th century society, the female rogue held a tantalizing position in contemporary media. I've discussed the validity of A General History in the previous videos on John Rackham and Mary Read. Basically, we can verify a lot of its statements through earlier documents, which it most likely used as a source. And we can easily discover the embellishments when the author leaves out names and dates, writes melodramatically, or flat out plagiarizes from other similar stories. Hell, even the author's pen name is a plagiary of Charles Johnson, a famous playwright who wrote an influential piece on Henry Every. Anyway, to learn the origins of Anne Bonny and her legends, we first have to delve into the backstory provided by A General History, where it all began. You might wonder why I spell her name as A-N-N instead of A-N-N-E, with the E at the end. It's how her name is spelled in most period documents. The front cover of her trial document included the E at the end, and it was popularized by A General History. The letter is redundant, because it is silent anyway. Anne's chapter in A General History is quite confusing, but let's try to deconstruct it. Most of it is not even about her, but the circumstances leading up to her birth. Basically, her father was a lawyer living near Cork in Ireland, together with his wife and several servants, including a maid named Mary. The maid was being courted by a tanner. While the lawyer's wife was away, the tanner stole a trio of silver spoons. The maid discovered her absence and threatened to report him to the constable. The tanner, realizing he's screwed, told her the spoons were just misplaced. So, he hides them in the maid's bed, thinking she'll discover them when she goes to sleep and will go, haha, he just pulled a prank on me, XD. However, the maid did not discover the spoons, because she was having an affair with the lawyer and sharing his bed during the wife's absence. So, she reports the crime to the constable, and when the tanner finds himself being hunted, he believes the maid stole the spoons and blamed the crime on him. When the lawyer's wife returns home, he goes to tell her. The wife finds it unlikely that the maid is a thief, but finds it strange how she didn't discover the spoons. So she realizes that she must have slept elsewhere, in her husband's bed. So, she decides to take the maid's place. That night, the husband sneaks in and lays with her, thinking it's the maid. The day after, the wife calls the constable and has the maid arrested for stealing the spoons. The maid spent some time in jail, but was released on lack of evidence. It was also discovered that she was pregnant. However, soon it is discovered that the wife is also pregnant. Thus, the husband learns of her sneaky trick, separates from her, and goes to live with the maid. She gives birth to a daughter, Anne Bonny. The small family migrate to Carolina, where the lawyer becomes a merchant and buys a plantation. Johnson describes Bonnie as being of a fierce and courageous temper, that she allegedly stabbed a servant maid to death, and that she once beat a man senseless for trying to rape her. Against her father's consent, she married a poor sailor and moved to New Providence. It was here she met John Rackham and became a pirate. At first I thought of summarizing the chapter as her father was an Irish lawyer and her mother was a maid he had an affair with. But I seldom see the backstory talked about in detail and just how melodramatic and cheesy it is. Neither does it include any names or birth dates, further highlighting its dubious authenticity. And the constant rant about the spoons, Jesus Christ. None of this has stopped a few historians from trying to legitimize the story. The most notable theory claims that Anne was born in the year 1700 to William Cormac and Mary Brennan. This theory has been cited by popular sites like Wikipedia, and can ultimately be sourced to Anne Bonny's entry in the Oxford Dictionary, written by historian David Cordingley. So, where did he get it from? Cordingley had previously written a book on the same subject, in which he cited a publication from the year 2000, written by Tamara Eastman. Eastman was later called out and admitted to never having any evidence. She discovered Mary Brennan herself and associated her with Cormac and Bonny out of convenience, because Mary was the name of the maid in general history, and not because there was any actual relation. So, where does Cormac come from? Eastman discovered Cormac in two previous books, Women, Pirates and the Politics of the Jolly Roger from 1997, and Seafaring Women from 82. Both of these books took Anne's parentage from a novel called Mistress of the Seas. Yes, a novel. A fictional story. Written in 1964, Mistress of the Seas claims to be a biography of Anne Bonny. While the author claims to have done extensive archival research, he does not cite or include specific sources to back up his claims. Some of the characters in the novel have been adapted from a 1951 movie called Anne of the Indies. This book was the first to claim that Bonny escaped Jamaica, remarried, and settled with a gentleman in Virginia. Cordingley added to this theory, claiming that William Cormac obtained her release, that she married a Joseph Burleigh, had 8 children, and also brought back the boy which Bonny had with Rackham on Cuba. Because yeah, general history claims Anne gave birth to a son during Rackham's pirating career. Then she must have become pregnant again before the trial. Anne then died in 1782. To these statements, Cordingley cites the, quote, family papers in the collection of descendants, unquote. And no one else has been able to access and read these papers. In Mistress of the Seas, Peg Brennan is stated to be Anne's mother. In 2000, Eastman believed her to be Mary Brennan, a 20-year-old woman charged with theft and threatening her employers. She was deported to the colonies along with her unnamed daughter. In a general history, the maid is actually named Mary, but it's a common name, doesn't completely match Johnson's story anyway, and Eastman just invented the association with Bonny and Cormac and Mary. Some have even disputed Bonny's Irish origins. There are no primary documents tying her to Ireland, and her surname is of English, not Irish origin. On the 19th of October, 1690, the birth of an Anne Bonny was documented in London. This would fit the timeline of the pirate, but we have no way of knowing for certain. What we can say is that she is likelier to have been English than Irish, and has no clear associations with William Cormac or Mary Brennan. General history claims that Anne married a poor sailor and moved to Providence, where she was seduced by John Rackham and went to sea with him. She became pregnant and was delivered to Cuba and gave birth, staying there a while to recover. Afterwards, Rackham returned and picked her up for some more piracy. This story seems highly unlikely, and is even contradicted by the second volume of A General History, in which more details are added to John and Anne's relationship and her stay on Providence. In this volume, the poor sailor is given a name, James Bonny. This means that Anne might have had a different maiden name, and assumed the surname Bonny upon their marriage. So maybe she was Irish after all. We'll get back to it in a bit. Anne was also accompanied from Carolina by a woman named Anne Fulworth, who pretended to be her mother. Anne appears to have tired of James rather quickly, and was soon found cheating on him. She eventually found a new boyfriend, in John Rackham. The two discussed marriage, and consulted Governor Woodes Rogers for a divorce. Rogers was outraged over this and threatened to have both Bonny and Falworth whipped and the punishment administered by Rackham himself. So the two lovers recruited a crew and stole a sloop, with Anne playing a considerable role in the hijacking. And so they embarked on their piratical venture. As I mentioned previously, this backstory contradicts the earlier one from the first volume. If Anne gave birth during her pirating career, as stated in the first volume, it would have happened during September of 1720. So she would have been heavily pregnant in August when they stole the sloop. This makes her active participation kinda questionable, but even more questionable is the fact that Johnson never mentioned it at all in the second volume. Considering his love for the melodramatic, he should have jumped at the opportunity to describe pregnant Anne Bonny stealing the sloop with a loaded gun. It would also make it impossible or even pointless for her to cross-dress, which is a huge plot point in Mary Read's chapter. This inconsistency adds further credence to the theory of the book having multiple authors, but I digress. As I mentioned in the video on Rackham, historians tend to pick and choose from the two volumes willy-nilly. But if you use information from one, you'd have to discredit information from the other. Because the first volume and the second volume have completely different backstories for Rackham, neither of which can be verified. The honest solution is really to use neither. Moving on to her alleged husband, James Bonny. He never existed. According to Johnson, he was one of the pirates that accepted the king's pardon. So, we can simply look at the preserved list of names that signed the amnesty. There is no James Bonny listed among them. What about Anne Falworth? In the governor's proclamation, Anne is actually listed as Anne Fulford, alias Bonny. This could mean anything. Maybe she was married to a Fulford, but the trial document introduced both her and Read as spinsters, that being unmarried women. Maybe Bonny or Fulford were aliases to hide from the law. Prostitutes were especially known for using these. There was no woman named Anne Bonny or Fulford listed among the New Providence residents before the pirates arrived in 1713, and no such person among the colonists who moved there in 1718. So, she must have arrived during the pirate anarchy, most likely between 1715 and 1717. This period saw a sort of economic boom, where smugglers, tavern keepers, and prostitutes moved into Providence to make a profit from satisfying the pirates' needs. A vast majority of the women would have been wives of the pirates, or prostitutes. According to Volume 2, Woodes Rogers threatened to punish Bonny when he received her request for divorce. Even if this probably didn't happen, it's not out of character. Rogers was a staunch Puritan who made considerable efforts to improve the moral standing of the colony, such as issuing religious pamphlets and cracking down on its vices. During his privateering career, he once picked up a group of women to wash and mend the clothes aboard his ship. When one of these black nymphs, as Rogers called them, behaved immodestly, she was whipped at the capstan. We don't know anything about her transgression. Maybe she was found flirting or even had sex with one of the men. In Rogers' own words, we don't count it as lewdness. Johnson most likely read the book, and it might have been a source of inspiration. We also know that Woodes Rogers contributed to the second volume and had some sort of correspondence with Johnson, but we don't know to what extent. Neither do we know anything about Anne's relationship with John Rackham. It is never described in any primary documents. All we know is that she was a spinster on New Providence, had an alias, and was pregnant by the time of capture in October of 1720. It's easy to assume a relationship with John, and it appeals to romantic notions of two lovers escaping on a ship. He was the guy in charge, the sort who often attracts female attention. Because the proclamation names Anne before Mary, it's easy to assume some importance to the captain. It's just as likely that Read was Rackham's lover, or maybe both of them, maybe neither. Maybe they were involved with all of the crewmen, or maybe the other two officers, or maybe one of the deckhands. Love works in mysterious ways. The point being, we can speculate all we like. But as it stands, no one has been able to uncover the true extent of Bonny's relationships. After stealing the sloop William in late August of 1720, Bonny eloped with the pirates on a short rampage between Providence and Jamaica. Johnson described Bonny as the most courageous person on board, and eyewitnesses described the women as active and eager. One of them said she acted as a powder monkey during engagements, passing gunpowder to the men. we know that she wielded weapons, threatened prisoners, and used very foul language. The latter was very common with lower-class women in the Caribbean, especially prostitutes, who tended to be quite bawdy. But they never engaged in any actual combat, nor did Rackham or any of his pirates. They only ever used their guns for firing warning shots. We don't know the extent of their authority among the men. According to one of the prisoners, Bonnie and Reed were armed with machetes and pistols, and, quote, cursed and swore at the men to murder the deponent, and that they should kill her to prevent her coming against them. Maybe these were just baseless threats meant to scare the prisoner, or maybe they were actual requests. The latter part of the quote seems like an appeal to logic. No witnesses, etc. Their request was overruled, indicating that they were outvoted by a majority or didn't have any authority to begin with. Pirates usually held councils on these matters, but we know next to nothing about the governance of Rackham's company, aside from him having a quartermaster which formed a vital part of pirate democracy. There's also the possibility of Rackham having deployed Bonnie and Reed as a tool of shock and intimidation. You can imagine what it would be like to be held captive by a high-energy pair of pregnant banshees, fueled by hormones, screaming at you and waving around their weapons. Neither did Bonnie or Reed ever disguise themselves as men. Eyewitnesses described them as dressing like women for the most part, only wearing more suitable sailor's clothes during chases and engagements. In particular, they were described as wearing men's jackets, long trousers, and handkerchiefs tied about their heads. The cross-dressing was a huge motif in Johnson's book, and it was something heavily associated with female rogues in contemporary literature. It appeared just 2 years prior in Moll Flanders, believed by several historians to have been a huge influence on the stories of Bonnie and Reed. The career ended on the 22nd of October, 1720, when Bonnie and the rest of the pirates were captured. The battle basically went like this. The pirates tried running away, the pirate hunters caught up with them, asked the pirates to surrender, the pirates replied by firing a gun, to which the pirate hunters fired all of their guns, and the pirates surrendered. According to a general history, Bonnie, Reed, and a single crewman were the only ones still standing on deck, when the rest retreated below and called for quarter. They allegedly punished the cowards by shooting them, killing one and wounding others. This is something the depositions would have noted, which they didn't, so it was most likely made up. There weren't any casualties in the quote-unquote battle. When Bonnie and Reed were sentenced to hang, they pleaded the belly, and that is, asking for mercy on grounds of pregnancy. The execution was stayed. Reed died in late April the next year, likely from complications of childbirth. Regarding the fate of Anne Bonny, no one has found a satisfying conclusion. Even Johnson admits that we cannot tell. Most likely, she was spared execution. It was unpopular to execute women, especially mothers. In the previous episode I mentioned Martha Farley, who in 1727 accompanied her husband on a pirating expedition. On account of having 2 children, she was absolved of her crimes. On the 29th of December, 1733, the parish records at St. Catherine's Parish, Jamaica, mentions the death and burial of an Anne Bonny. Interestingly, this was the same place where Mary Reed was buried, 12 years prior. Is this the same Anne Bonny? What happened in between? What happened to her child? No one knows. Bonny has made a frequent appearance in popular media ever since the first publication of a general history. The concept of a hot-tempered Irish redhead pirate paints a vivid fantasy. She seems indeed to have been hot-tempered, but she certainly wasn't Irish, and we don't know her hair color. She makes her first appearance in Volume 1 of A General History. This woodcut depicts her wearing a bonnet, or maybe an odd interpretation of a kerchief, a strange-looking waistcoat, baggy trousers, and some odd shoes. Maybe she was meant to be smaller than a man and is wearing clothes too big for her. Her pistols are just awkwardly floating around in the sash, or baldric, whatever weird thing she's wearing across the chest, and she wields a weird cutlass and a halberd-headed tomahawk, which sometimes actually appeared in the period, especially among the French, it seems.
Oh mon Dieu, Anne Bonny était française?
Her woodcut in the 1725 Dutch edition is artistically better, so you're more likely to see it featured across all media. She wears a hat common among Dutch sailors.
Was Anne Bonny Nederlandse? What? What say?
A more plausible jacket, a shirt pulled down to reveal her breasts, of course, a baldric holding both her cutlass sheath and a pair of holstered pistols, the pistols looking weird and the holsters likely being a fantasy, then a pair of trousers, which look very much like the type worn by English sailors, a pair of regular shoes, and an axe. Sailors did use axes, primarily as a tool, but they usually had a hook on the back. And really, I could go further into this and analyze her depiction in later works, but I frankly can't be bothered. She's been an appealing character for 300 years now. Tyler Rodriguez wrote a paper on the aesthetic development of Anne from 1724 up until today. The conclusion is basically that the different depictions of Anne Bonny have consolidated into a single vision, so that when you ask an AI to generate a picture of her, you get the same Irish redhead. There's not really a huge visual difference between Anne in Black Sails, Assassin's Creed 4 or The Lost Pirate Kingdom, though I only ever watched the trailer. No depiction comes truly close to matching her eyewitness description, which is a shame, because so few specific pirates actually have detailed visual descriptions like these. In regards to the backgrounds and personalities of Bonny, Reed, and even Rackham, creative freedom can really go nuts, since we don't know anything about them. I do wish more people would play with this and go outside of the mold, which is ultimately what's frustrating about these characters. If you want to create something about pirates, they're a safe card. You don't have to do so much research, nor a lot of thinking, can appeal to the feminists and the coomers simultaneously. If Rackham, Bonny and Reed are to receive more coverage by historians and creative media, some innovation needs to happen. A few historians like Benison Little and David Fickham have touched on the societal implications of their career, such as what their authority might have been aboard a sloop, what their role in the politics were, why this incident occurred in this time frame specifically, and why we don't have any female pirates prior, etc. Questions which are actually hard to pose and requires a deeper understanding of the period, both of the pirates, the role of women, and colonial society. But hey, clickbait is easier. As per usual, I'll be hosting a live stream after the video premiere is finished. You'll find a link in the premiere chat or in the subscription box below. See you there. As usual, thank you to my generous supporters over on Patreon. Patreon supporters get early access to my videos and can watch them without ads. And if you want to interact with fellow pirate enthusiasts, check out the link to our Discord server in the video description. Cheerio!